Absolutely, completely surprising. Idit was the face of Yamina in the Knesset. She was the arm of Naftali Bennett in passing things in the parliament. She wasn't particularly good at it, but she was the one who was supposed to keep stability. For her to betray Naftali Bennett, leaving him with only 5 members of Knesset from his party, shows that he had really so little control over the people who he handpicked to put on his list that they're bringing him down even when he's prime minister. That's a slap in the face like I've never seen before in Israeli politics, and it can lead to an election. It can lead to a lot of different developments.
And your thoughts here, was this really over so-called chametz, and where does this take the governing coalition, and for that matter, the entire country?
Yeah, well, first is, as Gil Hoffman just said, David, this means of having the government potentially fall is a big surprise. The fact that this government would fall is not, of course, a surprise. This is a government with a narrow majority, with a huge range of views ideologically. So I don't think it's a surprise in the big picture that it would fall, but there have been many, many scenarios sketched out about how it would happen. Would it happen, for example, because the Islamist Ram party would be dissatisfied and see it to its advantage to leave? Maybe Eli Avidar, that renegade member of parliament from Avigdor Lieberman's Israel Beitenu list, maybe he would bring the government down. Maybe Benny Gantz from within at the time of the rotation when Yair Lapid would be scheduled to be prime minister because of personal and political rivalries, maybe Gantz would bring the government down. Maybe some other right-wing lawmaker would do it. Nobody sketched out this scenario, and Gil explained exactly why. As for what lies ahead, look, the parliament right now is in recess, so there's nothing that can happen in the immediate term. But once the parliament comes back, this is a government that only has 60 seats out of 120 in the Israeli parliament. Obviously, even basic math shows that that's not a majority. Only one other member would have to defect in order for the opposition to have a majority and to be able to topple the government, potentially form its own government. And once the government is this rickety, David, and it's been rickety from the beginning by its nature, but once it's this rickety, there's every incentive for another member of parliament to defect. Also, every incentive for those parties in the left-wing flank of this coalition to up their demands and up their pressure on the government because they know it's not stable. And their best political move is to appeal to their base looking ahead towards the next time that Israel goes to the polls. So there just doesn't seem to be a real scenario where in the medium, certainly in the long term, where this coalition is able to survive. Just one word, though, if you step back and look at the wider picture, the fact that this government came into being, the fact that this government survived for 10 months is itself a tremendous success. And in the big picture, I think those who support this coalition and its many parts have every reason to be proud of the fact that it came into being, that it lasted 10 months, maybe more than might have been expected given its nature, and that it achieved its primary purpose, which was unseating Benjamin Netanyahu and demonstrating to the country that there was an alternative. There was a world in which someone other than Netanyahu would be prime minister, would sit in that position, and would run the country. Of course, over the longer term, the country's going to have to decide what it wants and what it likes, and in all likelihood, it might in some way, shape, or form deliver the kind of split verdicts that we've come accustomed to in the past 2 years in Israel.
Along those lines, and Gil, coming back to you on this, we saw the eager soundbite put out there by opposition leader Benjamin Netanyahu. What kind of opportunity is this for him now? We saw in Seelman's statement saying she knows that there are others, quote unquote. What's this moment for him? This is what he's been working for and waiting for.
Yes, absolutely. Netanyahu wants to come back to power, and it's very hard for him to come back to power because there is not a coalition of 61, even with her, who wants him to be the prime minister. It would be much easier if he would stand aside and allow some kind of Medvedev to temporarily lead the Likud and lead the government and allow the current Knesset to have a different prime minister. Yet Yariv Levin, the chairman of the Likud faction, he says that's not an option, that Israel would have to go to elections, even though that's not what the people want, and even though there are 80 right-wing members of Knesset and another 8 in blue and white who don't want Lapid to become prime minister. So there's plenty of reason to have a government be formed with the current Knesset. But if you're so committed to Netanyahu becoming prime minister, then elections would then have to be the only way. You'd have to
do you see a way that they'll be avoided? I mean, you're describing the various scenarios here. Do you think it's more likely we'll avoid elections or go to elections? And on top of that, what about the Arab Joint List? Are they a potential partner in a government?
The answer is 50-50. We'll see Roz from Meretz has called for the joint list to join the government and save Israel from a government with Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. That's far-fetched.
Far-fetched, the Arab joint list joining the government?
Yes. I mean, it's one thing to have Ram, which is committed to dealing with just civil issues, joining the government. I don't see anyone in the joint list who's willing to set aside dealing with the Palestinian issue, dealing with serious diplomatic and security issues in order to keep this government together. They have themselves said they would prefer to go to elections.
And Owen, less than a minute here. Your take, elections, is that the next thing up for this government?
It looks like it. Again, they'll try to get another defector. Maybe then there would be 61. I hear what Gil is saying between the lines, that 61 isn't even stable, which is quite interesting because, again, it had been thought that there were 59 and now potentially 60. I do think it's far-fetched, as Gil said, for the joint list to join the government. Hard to see any, certainly at this stage, with this government as shaky as it is, to see members of parliament from the Yamina list, from New Hope, the Gideon Sa'ar-led right-wing anti-Netanyahu list, being willing to stomach the idea of a government being supported by those members in the joint list. Seems awfully far-fetched, but there are plenty of other scenarios about where this renewed political quagmire could lead us.
Owen Alterman, our correspondent, and Gil Hoffman of the Jerusalem Post, thank you both for being with us. A big development this morning.